Welcome, Advita. It's really great to have you here. Can I get you to do a bit of an introduction to yourself and who you are so our listeners can know?
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Advita Patel. I own an internal communications and employee experience consultancy called Comms Rebel, based in Manchester, actually, just 10 minutes away from here. And I started the business in 2020, January, because I felt 2020 was a brilliant year to start a brand new business after working 18...
Not much else going on.
No, nothing else going on, yeah. After working 18 years in different organisations as an in-house internal communication professional. I also own a second business called A Leader Like Me, which is a global consultant focusing on helping organisations build inclusive communication cultures through the ED&I strategy. And then the third business, because I'm not busy enough, obviously, is a coaching retreat called Calm Edge Rebels, where we help organisations and individuals build confidence in who they are and what they believe in.
Brilliant. I love that mission-driven approach to all three different types of organisations. It's fantastic. So we know that you have recently released a book, and we'd love to hear a bit more about it, especially around the sort of, how we use effective internal communication to promote diversity, equity and inclusion. And so, tell us a bit about your book and why you decided to write it.
Really interesting story about the book. So I always had a dream that I wanted to write a book of some sort, but it was kind of like bashed out of me when I was 15 by my English teacher, who was a realist, don't get me wrong, but was very much like, don't even think that you could be an author, like get a serious job kind of thing. So I kind of parked it, and I used to write little romantic novels.
Oh.
I was like 13, 14. I think I watched too much Sweet Valley High. Only people of a certain age will know what that is. So I always had a bit of a pipe dream to write a book, but I never really thought what it would be or anything. And then I just left it alone like you do when you grow up and you move on. And then I read a book by Ruchika Tulshyan called Inclusion on Purpose. An incredible book, by the way. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. And Ruchika is an ED&I, equity, diversity, inclusion specialist and consultant based in the US. And her book was focused on women of colour in the workplace. And when I read that book, I felt that she was literally living my life. Yeah. And I resonated with everything that she said in there. And one of the things that she said was the challenges that a lot of organisations have sometimes is how to communicate effectively when it comes to inclusion and when it comes to equity and diversity. And the miscommunication is what sometimes causes challenges. Now, by this point, Priya and I already were working on A Leader Like Me, which was, at that time, a membership aimed at underrepresented women of colour to help them build confidence in their careers. And we met with them on a weekly basis, and we did a short training program with them, and we did some coaching, because I'm a qualified confidence coach as well. So I used that kind of knowledge and experience to help others. And then I remember emailing Priya and said, you know what, with our internal comms experience, we really should be putting together some words to help other communication professionals understand the role they play in the world of inclusion and equity, because I feel like that's a barrier. Yeah. A lot of organisations bring in incredible consultants that can help them develop an ED&I strategy. Then that consultant leaves them with this plan, and a lot of folks are like, now what? Yeah. And what you find is that the internal comms teams and the HR leaders are not as experienced in how can we communicate this across the organisation that is meaningful. And Priya and I already were doing this work within our own consultancy. So Priya owns a consultancy in Canada. And Priya's response to me was, no thanks. I don't want to write a book. I'm okay. Yeah. I was like, what? I said, you know what? And I'm quite good at like persuasion and stuff and giving her the facts and all that. So we got on a call and I said, you know what? Let's just put together a proposal. We know what we want to say. We advise communication professionals all the time and leaders on how to communicate better around inclusion. Why don't we just put a chapter synopsis together? It takes ages to get a book deal. We've heard from our friends who are authors how long it took them to get a book deal. And we've got nothing to lose, right? Yeah. And she's like, okay, fine. So we spent an hour together and we crafted this synopsis and we wrote what we would do in each chapter, sent it off to Kogan Page. Kogan Page got in touch within a few days and said, we're really interested in the idea. 3 weeks later, we got the contract. And Priya was like, Thank you.
You told me it was going to take ages.
So it was like we submitted it end of May 2022. They got in touch within a few days to say we're really interested in this idea, we're going to take it to our board. And then 2 weeks after that, we got the contract that they wanted to sign, and they wanted us to start writing the book in July.
Wow, that's a quick move.
It was a quick, and they wanted the book to be written by the beginning of December. So we had 5 months to write the book. So, I avoided approaching Priya about the stresses on us to write this book. I mean, it's great, it's a good stuff, it's needed. But it's probably one of the best things I feel I've done in my career, not only in the sense of my achievement, because writing a book is an undertaking, I'm not even going to lie. I imagined I'd be sat on a beach, in a nice
writing retreats,
waves lapping on. I could walk down and all that kind of stuff.
Words are flowing.
Exactly, yeah. No, it wasn't. It was in my garden office every weekend for 5-6 hours, trying to balance a growing business and writing a book at the same time. But we got so much out of it, both of us, in terms of research and development, the case studies, and to date now, we've just sold over 800 books in the last couple of months, which is amazing. So it shows how much it was needed.
Yeah, and I think the point that you've hit on around internal communication professionals feeling confident and comfortable in this topic is so important. Loads of the companies we work with tend to struggle to bring those teams on board. So we run a reporting platform, and there are teams who are usually administering that are quite far away from the internal communications teams usually. So they tend to be people who are in support services or in HR, employee relations type roles, and sometimes ED&I professionals as well. But then they are like, well, we need to promote this platform, we need to let people know about it, and how you communicate that. And then there's that battle around, well, are we going to make the situation worse by talking about it more? I don't know if you've heard that one, but it's really common that we hear that. And we have to sort of say to people, actually, it's reassuring for people to know that people think about these challenges, and there are the fact that you're presenting them with ways in which they can respond to these issues and what actions they can take is a gift. And getting the internal communications teams to sort of see that they're part of that overall piece of work can be a bit of a challenge when, understandably, they're usually heavily loaded with so many different things people want to communicate, and it's how do you prioritize as an internal communication specialist, right?
It's really tough, but I always say to the folks that I work with in internal comms is there's no point communicating some of the stuff if people don't feel included. If people feel excluded from the work that's taking place and they can't see the value that they're bringing, it doesn't matter how many campaigns you're kind of throwing out there, people are not going to pay attention. So the frustration's on you, because you're wasting your time and energy in sending out these campaigns for various things without any meaning behind it. And you need to be able to ask the curious questions so you get an understanding yourself on the purpose of why you're communicating something. Priya and I were presented at a HR conference in June this year, actually. And before we did our talk, we walked around the venue, and they had round tables taking place sporadic. And around the round tables, they had big boards where you put post-its on how to solve a problem or how to solve the challenge. There was a board around well-being, there was a board on ED&I, there was a board on trading, and there's a board on performance. 4 boards. As we walked past, the well-being board with post-its was overflowing, to the extent where it's outside of the actual board itself. The ED&I board, 6 post-its.
Wow.
And I would say to Priya, we looked at the stuff, that challenges that the post-its were on the well-being board, and I said to Priya, those challenges that they're talking about on the well-being board is direct impact of the lack of inclusion and belonging that people have. The reason you got people off with stress, the reason you got people who are leaving businesses, the reason you got people who are not connecting with their leaders is because they don't feel included.
Yeah.
So deal with why they don't feel included, and I guarantee the knock-on effect on well-being will be improved dramatically.
And we know that experiences around stress and bullying and harassment and all of these things disproportionately impact people who are from marginalised identities, right? And when you start to look at the number of people from different marginalised identities, they actually probably make up the majority of your workforce. Like not necessarily independently if you look at each characteristic individually, but when you start to
put the intersectionality together
and think about the intersectionality, exactly, you start to think, actually, this is the majority of my workforce, and they're all being negatively impacted by this, and perhaps it is something I need to address, not just from a well-being standpoint, but like you say, from a belonging and inclusion
and
one
you if you look at the socioeconomic side of things, which isn't a protected characteristic, I believe it should be, but it isn't. Same. It's even bigger. And the leaders are sometimes can be a bit removed away from what is actually happening to their workforce. And I believe as internal comms or communication professionals, we have a duty of care to share that information, what we're hearing, because HR can be seen as the enemy sometimes, I have to admit. And I've got lots of great friends who are HR professionals. One of my best friends is HR director. And I've seen the response that HR often get, and HR have to protect the business. And I'm not saying that comms professionals don't work for the organisation, they do. But ultimately, we're almost like the mediators between the leadership team and the workforce, because we're lucky enough and privileged enough to have an oversight of across the board. And as professionals, we should be able to go to our leaders and tell them, this is the situation that's going on right now. This is what I'm hearing from your workforce. What do we need to do to make sure that they are feeling included and have a sense of belonging in this organisation? Because right now, it's not there. And we need to kind of figure out through a communication channel, through conversations, we need to sort it out. But there's a lot of comms folks who struggle to articulate that in a confident way. Because they feel that they are rocking the boat, or they don't have the right to say something, or the leaders can be quite dismissive. Let's not even go there. Like they can be quite, who are you? You write my newsletter and you put stuff on the intranet. That's a perception they often have of what the comms role is, which is why it's so easily under-resourced and under-budgeted, because they can't see the strategic impact that professional has in the organisation, which is one of the reasons we wrote that book, to demonstrate, actually, if you brought your communication professionals in your conversation right from day one, you'll see an incredible improvement in the way people communicate with each other in the business.
What I'm hearing there as well is around this idea of perhaps a two-way like communication. So that a lot of people think that like internal communications is just about putting information out, but it sounds like actually you get a lot of information in as well, and you're hearing so much from the workforce, and the fact that you're able to relay that, like that's such a powerful position to be in the organisation. And like if people aren't able to utilise that knowledge and that power to influence the strategies within the organisation, that's such a missed opportunity.
It really is. And it's that thing we talk about, active listening all the time, especially in the world of coaching. Are we actually listening to what people are telling us, and how are we actioning what we're hearing? So I hear this thing all the time in the world of comms, that people are tired of filling in surveys. Survey fatigue, people are tired, no one wants to fill it in. No, they're not tired of giving their opinion. What they're tired of is giving their opinion and nothing being done about it.
Yes. Absolutely.
All the time. And I'm like, and especially when you're asking marginalised individuals to share their experiences, I cannot iterate how damaging it can be for a marginalised individual to talk about some of the experiences that they've gone through, and then that team or leader or organisation not do anything. Yeah. I'm like, don't ask, because it's more harmful you asking and not doing anything than asking and then doing, it's more harmful for you asking and not doing anything than not asking at all. Yeah, and that's such a powerful message that we try and convey to the partners that we work with at Culture Shift. So we encourage, obviously, people to tell their experiences to us through our reporting platform. And I say to all of the partners that I work with, if you don't close that communication loop, you lose trust. And it's really important. So we've recently launched a feature where you can create an insight report to share with the communities that have been reporting, either through putting it on the website, through internal communications. And like for me, that's just so important. And even if all you can say is like, we've received this many reports of bullying, and this is, we've done this with this percentage of them, that's something. That's something for people to see, that like actually the reason they went to that site and them expressing their experience is not just been a waste of time, and that actually something's been done about it. It makes such imagine going into a workplace and sharing all these concerns that you've got and then just being ignored. Who wants to be ignored?
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be ignored. Like, if you can address it there and then tell them why. Look, you made a really valid point. We think it's really important. We don't have the budget. We don't have the resources. However, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z to make sure it's managed in the next quarter. Whatever you have to say. But don't ask people if you're not willing to communicate back to them. I've seen so many colleagues that I've worked with and supported through focus groups who have just really struggled with being included, and then the leader turning around and going, they're not committed. They're underperforming. This is, we've given them plenty of opportunities, but they're not taking those. And then they use things like, they've got imposter syndrome. Yeah. I'm like, I really, don't even get me started on imposter syndrome, but I'm like, I think you need to look at the environment that you're creating for that person and why they behave in the way they're behaving, and be real honest with yourself in why that's happening, because it's important. And I think that's the role of internal comms and communication professionals as a whole, to use that in a respectful way to build trust with that leadership team and tell them this is what's going on in the workforce. Yeah.
So moving on to talk a bit about how we think like internal communications teams can align with an organisation's like diversity, inclusion, equity strategies. Like, what do you think needs to happen more in order to make that possible?
There needs to be alignment between the comm strategy and the ED&I strategy. I don't believe it should be a standalone strategy. Mm-hmm. So if the communication strategy doesn't have any, like the weave in from ED&I, then I'd question why it exists. Because you can't, I always say you can't be sprinkled on top, it has to be baked in. And if you're not prepared to understand where the challenges are and bake it into your comm strategy, then is it tokenistic and performative? And there's a chapter in that book where we talk about conversation versus campaigns. And as comms professionals, we lean towards campaigns rather than the conversations. And the biggest successes is where the conversations take place. Yeah. And in order for conversations to take place, you need to be curious. And to be curious, you need to ask questions. So when you have an ED&I strategist coming in to build the strategy, then the comms person should be in that room. Yeah. Because they need to be able to advise and guide in how they can weave through some of these conversations in the channels that they own. And that is the power move. And at the moment, what I'm seeing is that ED&I work takes place independently with HR, like you said, HR and certain policymakers and maybe a few leaders. Comms are nowhere near it. And then the ED&I person will go, hand over to HR. HR will do things like traditional things like awareness days. It's Black History Month right now in October. My question is always, what have you done in the last 12 months for Black colleagues in your business?
Yeah. Why are you just doing it now?
Why are you doing it now? Same with International Women's Day, same with Pride Month, same with South Asian Heritage Month. What are you actually doing to make a difference to Black colleagues in your business in the last 12 months?
Yeah. And these things can be great conversation starters, but it has to feel like, rather than feel like something's being done to you, it's being done with you.
Exactly.
Right? Have, year-long round programs that bring these things in. Something we do at Culture Shift, so we will mark and celebrate all of those dates, but we also have learnings that we do on a monthly basis, and those themes never really intentionally line up with those dates. We'll just have a rotation of things where we're we've not talked about religious inclusion in the workplace, for example, for a while. So we normally bring someone in to share an experience, usually an external provider, and we then that kind of brills the conversation. And one of the things I really love about those sessions is usually we bring in some conversation about, that's in our policy. You can actually have extra days off for this, or you can we will mark this in this way, or we'll think about this occasion, or we'll have those conversations.
And it's continuous, right?
It's continuous.
It's a continuous conversation. Just because when the 31st of October comes and 1st of November starts, it doesn't mean that you stop talking about Black colleagues in your organisation some of the challenges that they might be facing. That month, to your point, is about marking the fact that they do face discrimination over other groups, and what are we doing to support them progress throughout the 12 months. Yeah. And how are we recognising that, how are we measuring that, and what difference are we actually making? Because if you keep doing it year on year and you're not doing anything in terms of helping improve their quality of life or performance or career, then don't do it.
Yeah. And like you said before, it could be performative and it could be tokenistic, and so much like equity and inclusion work just can end up feeling really performative and tick boxy. And a lot of the time I think organisations are like so desperate to be seen to be doing something, and they care more about that than they do about actually embedding it, right? So like, what's some of the sort of tips that you would have around sort of embedding that in an everyday sort of practice?
Well, the first is have continuous conversations and being curious about each other. I think in the world of hybrid, which we're in right now, it's really difficult to form connection. And it doesn't matter what people say, because people love working, well, sorry, I'm stereotyping. Most people tend to like working from home and like the option or the choice of coming into the office, which is fair, and I agree with that. And I think flexible, agile working is a way forward. However, you have to be very intentional with how you're building connections with people that are not as visible in person, because you've built that connection on micro moments. Yeah. When you're making a cup of tea in the kitchen, when you're going to get your lunch from the spa, when you're going for a walk at lunchtime, those little tiny micro moments is where you build that trust with each other. And if you're trying to replicate that online, you have to be very intentional in how you do it. Yeah. And if you think about behaviours since the pandemic, it's back-to-back teams, back-to-back teams, right down to business, close off, 2 minutes to go for a wee probably, get back on, meeting again. Yeah. And I will always say to folks, look at the pattern of behaviour, and you should be keeping gaps in between each meeting to allow for conversation to happen. Because if you don't know something about somebody, you can't form that connection, and you don't understand their lived experience of how they're feeling. Yeah.
I love that phrase, micro moments. That's going to stick with me. Yeah. It's really good. We do donut chats is something that we do. It's a plug-in on our Slack channel, and it randomly selects you to pair up with someone from another part of the organisation, and you just have a quick sort of half an hour. There's never actually enough donuts, I have to say. But it's a really nice way of having like a short conversational moment. And I work remotely most of the time. I'm based in London, and I work in a co-working space. And these people like that I work next to and with are not necessarily my colleagues, but those micro moments are really important, I think. And actually, I've had that with some people, and I feel like I can say things, but there are other people where I'm like, I don't know you, and I can't raise some of the like challenges I feel in this space because I don't even know your name, for example. And it's just things like that like fostering connection, right?
But that's when you can have difficult conversations or constructive conversations, right? And we sometimes fear having them because we don't want to upset or we don't want to harm. You know, in my experience, and probably your own, 99% of people are not malicious. You know, they want to do good. Yeah. They want to make sure that everyone is belonging and it feels included and has value. Nobody wants to hurt anybody by purpose. But it's that biases that they may have, the stereotypes that they may hold, the disconnection that they might have, they can't relate, and the fear of hurting somebody. So when somebody says something that isn't right or fair, should I say something? Should I not say something? To your point, I don't even know their name. Like, will they think I'm not a nice person? So it kind of stops you being the active ally that you need to be. And that's why those micro moments, which I talk about all the time, are critical. And it's not about going on a spa weekend, you know, or anything like that if you don't want to. But it's about those tiny moments of getting to know somebody on a personal level is really important. The second thing I always say to folks to kind of understand so you don't become performative is think about the why. So why are we doing this? Like, what is the purpose of this? What is the actual call to action? What's the outcome? What behaviours do we want to see change from this campaign or this celebratory event or awareness thing? What are we actually trying to do? And have a conversation about what is it? Like, what we're doing? Is it because everybody else is doing it? Is that why we're doing it? Or is it because we actually want to see a difference? And critically, what is the outcome? Like, what behaviours do you actually want to see changing in those individuals within the organisation? And do personas if you have to. And I love personas. Like, I'm like, if you know your demographic of your organisation, you can create personas and you can get an understanding of how they consume information, how they learn. And if you know how they consume and how they learn, you can make your communication more personalised. A broadcast communication and absolute throwing comms at them every single day about different things, it's going to overwhelm. I worked for supported an organisation that brought me in because they had an ED&I consultant come in and do an incredible ED&I strategy, but there was disconnect from it all, and people weren't turning up to events or social things like that. So I came in to do a bit of an observation and a review, and in one of the focus groups, somebody slipped up and said to me, oh, I get like over 100 emails a day in my inbox. Anything that's got the word equity, diversity, inclusion, I've got a rule, and it goes into a separate folder, and I don't look at it. I was like, wow.
Yeah.
Like, when we talk about this world and the education that we need to give people, that individual has not looked at any comms around inclusion, diversity, equity in 6 months.
And as you said, like, people's intentions aren't malicious. I'm sure that person set that up thinking, when I find the time, I'm going to go back to that.
Exactly,
it's in one place. It's not going to get lost.
I'm not deleting it.
I'm not deleting it and putting it somewhere.
Yeah.
And I've been guilty of that on so many different topics.
Yeah.
And like, I think something I was thinking when you were speaking earlier was around, actually, I think we're over-reliance on text and written communication compared to verbal communication and like, you can't necessarily read intention or tone in text communication. So picking up the phone and having a conversation, or having a Teams meeting or a Slack call or whatever, is so powerful. And I know that can sometimes feel a bit more time consuming, but actually the benefit in the long run of being able to like address that point more directly and in a way that's not going to cause like ruptures because of written language being able to be misinterpreted, I think is quite powerful as well.
Yeah, it is, and it's the intention or the intent right behind that comms that can be sometimes missed. So if it's a difficult message or it's something that's got nuances around it, I will always advise the leader to do a video or to do an audio, because you can connect better with visual or voice, and it's helpful when you put it in a blog. Like, you can't read the tone, like, to your point.
I really love the idea of doing internal communications with videos, and I guess it's like bigger organisations, that makes sense, right?
Well,
like
even smaller organisations, like, why would you, like, video has been a big part of the comms industry for a while now. Sometimes they can go the other side and do hundreds of videos that, it just gets a bit OTT. But short, snappy videos, I always, the advice I give to folks is YouTube Shorts. Those 90-second short videos are so powerful. That's all the leader, and you don't need fancy technology really. You can just do it on your phone and go, hi folks, just wanted to jump on and say, I've heard this is what's going on. I'm just wanting to let you know that I'm on it. I'll be back in touch when I'm back in the office tomorrow. We'll have a bit of a team meeting. We'll have a chat. Yeah. Like, how much of that is so much more connecting and relationship building.
Word, like formal email.
A really dear colleagues, thank you for your... I'm like, oh my goodness. Like, we're in a world we consume information so much more than we ever have done so in our generations. People are tired, people are exhausted, they're dealing with trauma outside of work. The tragedies that we're seeing right now with Israel and Gaza is intense. And people are upset, they're emotional. There's a lot going on, and we need to be very conscious of that when we're working in organisations about their mental state and physical well-being. And whatever we can do to support them and give them that headspace to do the stuff that they need to do is really powerful, and they'll remember that. Yeah,
so much. How are we doing time? Something that we think about a lot in this sphere, I guess, is around addressing difficult topics and having uncomfortable conversations, right? And I guess internal communications teams have to deal with that quite consistently. And obviously also so do diversity, equity and inclusion specialists. And that feels like such obvious common ground to bring people together on.
Yeah, definitely. But people don't like confrontation or conflict, and those are the words they use when they talk about difficult conversations. So when I do reviews and I do focus groups, people go, oh yeah, we don't like having difficult conversation because we don't like conflict. And I'm really curious about that. So why do you believe it's going to be a conflict if it's an uncomfortable or difficult conversation? And it is the way that we have been conditioned as human beings. When we enter a debate or a discussion where the opposing person has a different view, we go in wanting to win. I have to win this, because that's the way we've been conditioned, right? Debates, the way what we see our politicians out there do and everything, we compete. And I would say remove the need of wanting to win and look at the core objective of what you're trying to do and the greater good. So what is that common objective from both parties in terms of what you want to achieve, and go in with productive disagreement. And that's a Buster Benson framework. So Buster Benson's a guy who talks about productive disagreements a lot, and there's lots of his stuff online that you can check out. But I've been invested in Buster Benson's framework for a long time, because he talks about it's not about debates, it's not about fights or getting in our own way. It's about productive, disagreements with the core outcome that's common in between. And sometimes it's give and take. And it's entering those conversations with respect, and it's entering those conversations with an understanding of why that person may feel the way they feel, and asking the questions in the right way. Yeah. And I will always say to people, use the coaching style to understand. So if you don't agree with somebody of their point of view, then ask them, can you help me understand how you got to that solution? Because I'm struggling to get there by myself. Can you walk me through it? And that allows
I disagree, and this is what I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is the politician style of like, you're wrong and I'm right.
Yeah. Oh, you're an idiot.
Yeah.
Like, you know, your face may say that you're an idiot, but verbal and non-verbal is just as powerful, right? The non-verbal reaction. So it's like, I'm feeling a bit conflicted about what you just said, and I'm really struggling to get there. So can you walk me through how you got to that end kind of...
That's very familiar, isn't it, with politicians sort of doing the whole like, I'm right, you're wrong sort of approach.
Yeah, and that's the way we've been conditioned, right, to win. And when we see influencers like that in the space that we, you know, in the media and in the papers and online now, that's the way we enter conversations, that I have to win, and we've been conditioned to win. Ever since we were kids, right, it's always been kind of, you have to win this, you know, stick up for yourself. But Buster Benson's kind of methodology and framework is about productive disagreements. So centering the outcome of what you want to achieve, that's for the greater good. And working together and using coaching kind of questions is what I use, is like, can you help me understand how you got to that point of view? Because I'm really struggling to kind of walk myself there. And how does that reflect on what we're trying to achieve? Those kind of questions, rather than those kind of, I disagree, I think you're an idiot, I don't want to work with you anymore, that kind of stuff. And it just causes unnecessary tension. And at the end of the day, you know, we're all adults and we're all grown-ups, and we don't all have to agree with everything, but we have to be respectful with the conversation, and we have to put the greater good before our own viewpoints and biases.
Yeah. But also in television, film, that sort of media, this idea of like the good bad dichotomy, like comic books, you know, like they you know, the villain and the hero,
evil and good,
and good, exactly. And so we're so like shrouded in this sort of like really binary idea of like what is good and bad, and actually like can truths be held very strongly that perhaps seem to contradict one another, but actually are both like true. There's a TV show called Once Upon a Time that helped me unravel some of that. I really enjoyed it for that. It's so good. Because this idea that, like, I think it was that moment where like someome's heart gets pulled out, you could see that
the blackness,
but it could heal itself. And that really like spoke to me in terms of trying to understand that, like, you know, people aren't inherently bad. We do bad things, and we do and we can change those, and we can heal from those. And it's like, I really think that like that actually, being able to unpack that idea really helps us to come to difficult conversations from a place of sort of more care and understanding and humility, which I think is, for me, what respect is.
Exactly. And I always say it's not if you fail, it's when you fail. Because if you're not failing, you're not learning. And if you're not learning, you're not growing. And to have that growth mindset, you need to be able to be okay with failing and how quickly you learn from that. And if you're resisting wanting not to fail, you're not learning or growing, and your growth mindset is not there.
I heard the analogy recently around sort of like teaching children to walk, and it's like, you don't go to a child like, oh, you failed, you didn't manage to make those steps, like that one step is like, wow, congratulations, you made the one step even though you fell, like, let's keep going,
and you'll fall 100 million times after that. And
exactly.
You know, I always say to folks, don't give yourself too much of a hard time. Learn from it, educate yourself, and be better. Be 1% better than what you were yesterday. And I always believe that if you can leave people in a better place than where you found them, you've done your job. And people are forgiving if they can see that you're trying. And you will say things. I've said things. I've had to unlearn a lot of things in this space and learn again. And there's been communities that I wasn't aware of that I've had to go in, step in that space and ask uncomfortable questions for myself to get rid of the biases that I held about them. And that's a tough thing to admit, because you want to be seen as somebody that's, you know, fair and transparent and equitable and equal and all that. But life gets in the way, and our biases around us are surrounded by other people, environments, situations, lived experience, unfairness that we may go through. And we have to take all that on board when we're working with others.
I think you hit a point there around not having to know everything, not having to be an expert in everything, which I think perhaps, that is maybe where the difference lies between perhaps your DEI leaders and professionals and your internal communications teams, is that even DEI professionals, like, they're made to believe and think that they need to know everything about
every characteristic,
every characteristic, everyone's lived experience. And it's like, most of the time people come with a lived experience. Like, the majority of people who work in that field have some kind of lived experience of marginalisation or oppression. But they will spend a lot of their time and career learning about other people's experiences. And perhaps it's the case that they are at a slightly different place in that learning than the internal communications professionals, but there's absolutely no reason why that learning can't be had by those people. But also, like, it's not that you have to be expected to know everything, and being able to know what you don't know is really key.
And saying, I don't have and it is a privilege to say this, but you can say, I don't have an opinion about this right now, and I need to go and educate myself a little bit more before I can give my thoughts. And it's okay to say that, and it's also okay to say there are more people qualified and better informed than me on this. So I'm going to leave it to them to have their opinions. It's like sustainability. I care about the environment and I care about climate change, and it's a big thing for me. But there are more people who are qualified and experienced in dealing with the policies and stuff that I would just let them do that, and I do my bit.
Yeah.
I do my bit. I recycle. I will make sure that I'm being conscious of how I travel. Those, again, it's like the micro changes that you make that can have a big impact. And in the book, I think we said, small ripples create big waves, and that's across the board. When you get involved in, if you feel the need to get involved in absolutely everything, the overwhelm and the mental health impact can be catastrophic. Yeah. And you have to be quite mindful about, actually, where do I want to be? Where do I want to be the ally for and the active bystander? What do I need to learn? Where are my gaps? Where am I causing harm? That's a big one. Where am I causing harm by my ignorance?
Yeah.
And that's you to step back, reflect, and learn.
And being receptive to hearing that feedback from others, right? Yeah. Which is, again, where a lot of leaders fall down in this work, where it's like, no, I know everything. I'm like, can't possibly be contributing to that form of oppression because, that whole, like, well, I know someone who is, like, kind of, my neighbour is, so I can't possibly be, can't possibly be racist, I've got a black neighbour, like, those sorts of comments where it's actually, like, it's disingenuous and it's unhelpful and it's egotistical.
And also, not every black person, not every South Asian person is homogenous.
Exactly.
We've all got very lived experience. If your black neighbour doesn't mind being called a certain name, that doesn't mean that everybody else is exactly the same. So be curious about that individual and be conscious about how they want to be referred to and how they want to be respected. Absolutely. And this is when people do say things like, oh, I've got a black neighbour, or my girlfriend's black, or I've got a South Asian mother-in-law. Who cares? Yeah. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, are you actually using that person that you're speaking with as respectfully and asking them the curious questions about how they want to be referenced or how they want to be spoken about? And it's like when that whole thing about where you're from. Yeah. Where are you from? Where are you really from? Yeah. And people are like, I don't know what the big deal is. It's like, the big deal is that somebody made someone feel that they don't belong. Yeah. And ultimately, that's what it was.
It says, we know you're not from here. Yeah. Tell me more.
And I want to know exactly where your heritage is from. Yeah. And that's what the problem is the question itself, if she asked it once and the person said, I'm from Brixton or wherever, it should have been left. It's not the question, it's how many times that person asked that question. And I get it all the time. No, but where are you really, really from? I'm really, really from Bolton, if you really want to know. And I am stubborn about it because I know what they're asking. But you asking me that question is making me feel like I don't belong in this country.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's that, like, cumulative effect of it, right? That one person asking you that one time might seem innocent and not that big a deal, but actually when you've been asked it your entire life, it
death of 1,000 cuts.
Exactly.
The death of 1,000 cuts, definitely.
Yeah. Something else I wanted to talk about while I've got you here is around sort of some of the misinformation that we sometimes see in the media around equity, diversity and inclusion. And I think it links back a bit to what we were saying there about people thinking they know. And perhaps sometimes they've actually read about it and they've not checked their facts. Yes. And so, how do internal communication professionals, like, navigate that space of like actually deciphering what is true and what's not, and how do they find out like, you know, the evidence base for the information that they're sharing.
So misinformation and disinformation is rife right now at the moment, and we are very conscious of how much information people are consuming that is inaccurate. So as a communication professional, and in fact any professional, should be doing their due diligence on the information that they're reading and verifying the facts. So go to trusted sources and make sure that you're looking at the story from both sides. And now with ChatGPT and AI, there's so much information being thrown out there that is just so not true. And I will always say to folks that the algorithm is sided with your search history. So if you're searching for one particular topic over and over again, all you're ever going to see is your point of view. Yeah. You're not going to see anything else, whether it's true or not. That's all you're going to see. So you believe that's your reality. So everybody believes this, and everybody's on my side. In fact, be conscious about manipulating your search history a little bit and looking at the opposite.
An incognito search.
Yeah,
I remember the moment I figured out that was a thing when one of my colleagues was researching wedding makeup. Yeah. And she had typed into Google, like, wedding makeup. And she was like, it's all so boring. Yeah. And I was like, let me see what I get. Yeah. And I had typed it in and I got like rainbow face because of being a queer person. Yeah. It was like have glitter and huge eyelashes and like be like adorned. Yeah. Whereas she was like, oh, mine's all like muted palettes and like bronzes and like
lip gloss.
Yeah. And she was just a very long time ago, but maybe a decade ago even. But like it was just such a big penny dropping moment for me to be like, oh, it shows me what I want to see, and it shows her what she thinks she wants to see, and she wants to do something different, and she's not finding it because of that. Yeah. And so, like, I guess that's an analogy for thinking about, like, you are in an echo chamber, and Google loves to give you that echo chamber.
Oh, they do. And also, you have to remember the social media platforms are businesses. The longer you stay on their platform, the more money they make. Yeah. So they want to keep you in that platform. And of course, the only way to keep you is to make you feel comfortable, to make you feel heard, to make you feel connected to people who have the same point of view. If you were always seeing people who are different from you or had different points of view, you'll switch off. And that's just human behavior. So it surprises me the lack of knowledge on how social media works. There's so many intelligent and professional people who use it as a point of source, finding the sources. I'm like, be very careful about where you're getting information for, and also who owns that social media platform. Yeah. I mean, we're not getting into the kind of, the Elon Musks of the world, but be aware about what's being kind of put into your algorithm and what's being shared and who's paying for what to get their tweets or X's or whatever they're calling it now promoted. Same on Instagram, same on Facebook, those kind of channels, and TikTok. It's manipulated to what you want to see and hear. Yeah. So as a comms professional, if you're using information to share the stories in your business or to advise your leaders, be mindful of that and look at both sides of the story. And the great example right now is Israel and Gaza, right? There's a lot of information out there. Some of it's accurate, some of it's factual, some of it's not. Before you go in and have an opinion about anything that's so sensitive and absolutely horrific when you look at the news, be mindful and get both sides of the story, because you're going to cause more harm again by not having your facts right.
Yeah. So thanks so much, Advita, for joining us. It's been really interesting speaking to you about building a culture of inclusivity. I've loved looking at how internal communication teams and diversity, equity and inclusion professionals can work together more closely, how they can influence ED&I strategies, and how we can, think about uncomfortable conversations, misinformation in the media. We've covered so much. It's been such a insightful and considered conversation, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's been such a privilege to talk to you today.